Okay, everybody, this is Nick from Mecha Warehouse, and today I thought I'd do something a little bit different from the content I've been doing so far. I wanted to put together a relatively quick tutorial. I know a lot of you guys are experienced builders, or at least already kind of established in the hobby, but I know there are a lot of people who watch our content that are not yet builders, might be interested in getting started, or maybe have gotten started, but could use some pointers. So I wanted to do a video, build a kit. This might end up being a several part series where we go into more detail on finishing and detail work in a follow-up video. But for now, the plan is to build a kit and go over all the nuances of building a kit the first time. So down here, we've got some of the tools that you might need, a few options. What I use as a bare minimum, I tend to use, I've got a pair of God hand nippers. These are kind of top of the line, but I'm actually going to use these today. These are the Bandai entry nippers that have become pretty popular on the site. They're very inexpensive, but I think they'll work fine. Take things a little bit further, I'm going to do this how I usually do it. So I use sanding sponges. I use 3M personally, has been my go-to brand. We've got Tamiya up on the shop. There are some other options that we'll be picking up as well. So these are a good choice. The other tool that I highly recommend for new builders, if you're just going to build it straight without painting, are these. These are Gundam Markers. These are panel lining markers. If you look at the tips, they are very thin, and they'll go right into those grooves on the kit, the panel lines. And I use a white eraser to clear those. You could also use, if you're fast enough, a Q-tip, cotton swab, something like this. So that's a brief overview of the tools. So I'll set these all aside. The kit I'm going to work on today is this kit right here. This is the high-grade Gouf. This kit is a kit. If you watched that Q&A video, an example here. This is the Gouf high grade right here. This kit is a kit. I've never built this kit before. I've built a relatively recent revive of the RX-78, but I've never built the Gouf revive here, so kind of looking forward to this. So when we open the box, we are going to come across bags like this, bags of runners. We've got, in this case, 3 bags, as well as the manual. So I'm going to set aside the box over here, 3 bags with runners in it. I'm going to set these aside too and open them as needed. And we have a manual. Let's see. This one folds out like this. On a page it shows, and the newer kits anyway will show what all the runners are, parts list. Sometimes there's parts that are not required. Sometimes they reuse runners from previous kits, so there's a bunch of parts of X's on them that we won't need, so those will become spares when all is said and done. And then we've got the instructions here, show you step by step how to put it together. So while we're at it too, there will often be some information. If you're up on your Japanese, you can read about the Gouf here. They have a color guide usually that will show you colors if you want to paint that kit, what the colors should be to match the plastic or to match the pictures in the manual. And let's get started here. So the first, the runners are lettered. So the first runner here that I need is D. I'll also need the F runner and the PC runner. The PC is where I usually refer to as polycaps. It's also, at least in theory, a good idea to look over all your runners as you open it to make sure that they're all in good shape. Every kit we sell, at least all the Bandai kits, are distributed ultimately by Bluefin, which means they come with a Bluefin sticker. And that Bluefin sticker, if you are ever find yourself missing pieces or have damaged pieces, you can get replacements by contacting them. If you can't find out how to on your own, you can always feel free to hit me up. I'm more than happy to help. Okay, so the first part I need is D2. This is a chest piece for the front of the chest, this one right here. So I'm going to cut this. The recommended method that I follow is 2 cuts at a minimum. The first cut's going to be a little bit further away from the part, and then when we get back closer to it, we'll cut much closer. Polycaps will cut right up next to the part because they usually don't show. They're usually pretty good about putting the polycap connections in places that are going to be hidden, and they're going to be buried within a part. They're usually used to help hold things together. Okay, so this is the chest piece. There are 4 nubs, and that's the connection to the runner. And we're going to remove those. We should try to cut very carefully and leave a little bit, tiny bit of space between the nub and the part itself. So this process is known as nub removal. So you'll notice that these parts leave a little bit of a mark. Those are known as nub marks or stress marks. When you cut the plastic, it will create a discoloration in the plastic, and that's that little bit of white you see. Removing nubs on white parts is actually a whole lot easier and less work on white because the plastic is already the same color. But basically, once I get them cut off, I'm going to take the sandpaper and lightly and carefully sand those nubs flat. I've got 3 different grades of sandpaper I use, or 3 different grits. The 3M ones, they are fine, super fine, ultra fine, and micro fine, which represent a range going from about 300 or so grit up to about 1500. You can get much finer grits, which almost end up polishing the plastic. But these are the ones that I use and I find are fine for my purposes. So you'll notice on both sides here there are still barely visible nubs. They're much better. And in that follow-up video, or later on in this video if I get really lucky, I'll show you how to hide those even more with top coat. But they're not super noticeable. And while we're at it, I mentioned panel lining earlier. So I use 3 different panel lining markers if I'm going to build using markers and straight build, not painted like this. I've got black, light gray or gray, and brown. Black I'll typically use for darker colors, blues, greens, any sort of dark colored plastic will get the black. Lighter colors like white, really light grays, will get the gray, and reds, yellows, colors like that I will use the brown on. And the reason for that is it just makes the kind of the contrast of the line to the rest of the plastic, it just looks a little bit better. If you wanted a really anime look, using black on white and such might actually help with that. It's kind of a matter of preference, but that's what I do. So I'm going to take the end of this marker, I'm going to jam it into these marks, kind of swish it around a little bit, try to get that marker in there. We got 2 lines on the front. You'll also notice I wasn't super careful about that. I got a lot over here that didn't quite make it in, and that's where the eraser comes in. So usually I'll give it a moment or 2. I think this is probably plenty of time. And I'm just going to pull this over. These are nice deep lines, so it's not too bad. And that's just going to get any of the marker that didn't make it into the panel line off of there. I mentioned at the beginning of this that you can use a Q-tip for panel line cleanup after the marker goes in. I use it on this one here. The key there is that the working time is much shorter. If you really let it dry, the Q-tip's not going to take it off. But if the marker is still wet, the Q-tip will work very well. And so you can kind of see that it's just smudged it. I waited a little bit too long. So I'll bring the eraser in, and that's going to clean it up the rest of the way. This is a good little note. The manual, let's see how well this shows up. It has these little markings here. Grab something pointy. Those indicate which side should go forward, so it's showing a little groove and the little slant going forward there. If you look at the part, there's a little groove. That part's going to go towards that front side there. So put that on. So one thing also that I think is notable, when you panel line next to where you've sanded, the sanding of the part makes the marker kind of stick to that piece. So if you can avoid sanding right next to or over a panel line when you want to use a marker this way, that's always a good idea. Sometimes, like in this part, it's sort of unavoidable. And so what I recommend is trying to use the eraser as usual. But if the eraser doesn't work, you might actually use that highest grit sandpaper and then sand over it again. As a general rule, you don't want to try to cut through the runner itself. Some nippers will be sturdy enough to do it. A lot of the higher end nippers will struggle a bit with those parts, and you potentially risk breaking them as well. Some people will use panel lining on open areas like this. So I'm going to actually get this in there and the line around, oops, slipping out of the lines there. So I'm going to get into those lines. Good enough. Ultimately though, it's important to keep in mind that this is all about having fun with it. So panel lining stresses you out and you don't enjoy it because it's too much, don't panel line it. If trimming and sanding nubs is too much, don't do it. I certainly won't judge you for it. I think just snapping a kit together can be very rewarding, but if you do feel up for it, taking the time and energy to try to get everything smooth, get the colors right, get the panel lines in there, maybe adding decals or other detail to the kit goes a long way to really make it look great. But there's a saying you'll hear thrown around all the time, gunpla is freedom, and that's I think very true. And what people mean by that when they say that is that you can kind of take from it what you want. But there's a saying you'll hear thrown around all the time, gunpla is freedom, and that's and what people mean by that when they say that is that you can kind of take from it what you want. Everybody's kind of got their own taste for what they think looks good, what they enjoy doing. And so I'd encourage you to try to figure out what you enjoy doing. Don't necessarily knock the things you haven't tried yet, but don't feel pressured to do anything that you're not interested in. But at the same time, if you're willing to experiment and try new things, I think you'll find a lot more ways to enjoy the hobby. And there we go. Now we got the backpack on there. So the torso is done. Step 1 complete. There's a ton of different grades of kits out there. The grades: high grade, master grade, perfect grade, real grade, RE100, a few other lines, full mechanics, etc. What those are referring to is the complexity of the kit. I wouldn't let that discourage you. Shoe part number 3. But some are obviously harder than others. High grades tend to be a great place to start if you're completely new to the hobby. This is a high grade kit here. There's half dozen runners. It can be done reasonably in an afternoon. but if you decide to put a lot more time and effort into it, you can get a lot further with it if you so choose. So this part, I'm not sure. Of course, the computer goes to sleep. So this part, hopefully this will show up on the camera here, has what's referred to as a mold line. Might barely show up there. So there's a little line that follows this whole edge here, and that is where the two halves of the mold connected around that part. So when a mold line is visible, you can remove it much the same way as the nub. So I'm going to actually sand all these parts here, including where the nub was, all around the outside here. The inside edge most likely won't be visible. Okay, so this part I'm working on right now is basically inside the head, where if you're familiar with the Gouf, there is a single camera, single eye inside the head. I believe this kit might actually allow it to pivot. There's a little gimmick. Some of the mono eye suits have that, so we'll be able to check that out in a moment. But to get the effect of that pink eye, there's a foil sticker. And so we'll put that sticker on this part. So this one will go right over there, a little snout. And then we're going to do the sticker. So this is a sticker right here. This is where, I guess, the secret tool that I had mentioned was a pair of tweezers can help a lot. I'm actually sort of tempted to try. We've got a product newly in stock from Delphi Decal that is a set of mono eye stickers, pretty much specifically for this kind of application. There's a ton on it. It's like one of those kind of things that you'll buy and probably never need to replace or never need to buy more of. And then this is going to go right down into here. There we go. And so we got the sticker on there, and underneath there is a little tab there, and that will allow us to rotate that mono eye within a certain range. All right, we get the head, and we'll throw the head on there. Beauteous. All right, so we just skipped ahead a bit here. Most of the way there, got the main unit done. Most of the right arms. A few other things I want to show off as we work through the remaining parts of this. The other shoulder here. I've also switched to the God hands, and I wanted to kind of compare. And one of the things I've definitely noticed is that the God hands cut much more cleanly. They kind of slide through the plastic like a hot knife through butter. The entry nippers, I think, are providing almost as clean of a final result, but the God hands definitely feel nicer. I mentioned earlier about mold lines, and so a mold line is basically where the two halves of the mold meet and it creates kind of a line. What we have here is what's referred to as a seam line, and the seam line is the line where two pieces sandwich together. So this shoulder pad or shoulder armor is two separate pieces slid together, and you'll notice they don't line up perfectly. So for this build, I'm going to just leave it like that. I'm not going to attempt to fix that. Some people do fix that, especially on painted builds where you can cover that fix-up, cleanup work that needs to happen there. The most common method is using Tamiya cement or equivalent polystyrene cement, and essentially bonding those two pieces together and then sanding the edge clean. Sometimes you need putty to get in there and make sure everything's leveled out. Well worth it when you're painting. In theory, it can be done in a non-painted kit, but you have to be very masterful about how it's done, so I don't bother. But when I paint a kit, I definitely go after, especially if it was something as egregious as those shoulders. It's probably the worst aspect of this kit, is the fact that the shoulder pieces are two pieces for the shoulder armor. Alright, so got the other arm on there now. That pops in there. And that pops on there. So we got a shield. Got that weird gun hand thing. And we look like we are pretty much good to go here. So basically concludes the build here. There's a few other accessories like the saber, heat saber I think is what it was called. It's got several other hands that I could build. Hopefully you found this interesting. Hopefully you found it helpful. If you're interested, I would love to do a follow-up video where I can throw some top coat on it, throw some decals on it, and show you what that top coat does to some of these nub marks that are on there, help hide some of that. And I think really a kit goes from looking like a toy to looking like a model once you put a matte coat on it. If you made it this far and you are an experienced builder, thank you. Hopefully you think this is valuable. Maybe you share it with a friend who might be getting into the hobby. If you are just considering getting into the hobby, hopefully this has debunked some of that difficulty that seems to come, or some of that challenge, make it a little more accessible for you. It's really not that hard to build a kit like this one. High grades are really easy. Master grades are a little bit more challenging, but they really aren't that bad. And if you want to watch more, definitely subscribe, because if you get onto our YouTube channel, typically every Saturday night I do a live session where I do some building. It's usually a lot of fun. Got a pretty big group. Usually give away a kit or two. Try to show off at least a few skills, help answer questions, things like that. So at any rate, thank you for watching. Yeah, see you later, guys.